All right, I guess we can start with the obvious one. Why you decided to introduce the Gatwick route?
Um, well, so the first thing was about adding capacity to Accra, and obviously in doing that we have two places to do that. Well, sometimes you can increase the aircraft size, but from Heathrow we're flying our largest aircraft that's not the 380, which is the 350. Our second largest aircraft in our fleet, next to the 350 and after the 380, is the 777 out of Gatwick because of the way that it has its configuration. But ultimately, we were looking to grow capacity into Accra. I was speaking earlier that if you look at kind of demand and recovery, I think demand has recovered beyond 2019 levels, which led us to wanting to increase capacity. One of the biggest challenges we have within planning the airline right now is we currently have 12 less long haul aircraft than we had in 2019. That's because we retired our 747s, and we get 12 more aircraft delivered over the next 3 years, but not till 2027. And so we're really constrained on where we can fly capacity. So when we were measuring up the adding additional frequencies, do we do it out of Heathrow or Gatwick? We also have 12 aircraft based at Gatwick that we also need to be deployed and kind of keep, and also to keep productive, and kind of the timing and footprint of the Accra flight fit very well with the availability we had of aircraft in Gatwick. But the other reason that we chose to do that out of Gatwick was if you look at the individuals, let's say, from the UK who are going to Ghana either to visit friends and family, for business, for leisure, and if you look at those who are coming to the UK to visit friends and family, and you look kind of where they are around London, for a large population of people, actually Gatwick is a more convenient airport to get to than Heathrow. And so we wanted to be able to offer both of those options, because we know that those two airports can attract different parts of London, right? So.
Great. And since the inaugural flight, some travelers have shared concerns and worries that you intend to eventually call off the Heathrow flight and just let it be Gatwick. What should they?
I have given my promise that is not the case. I think if we go back I think it was a couple years ago, we were very constrained on capacity going back to that, and I think we had 16 less long haul aircraft, and so it was really difficult for us to fly our schedule. And sometimes the routes that we operate in Gatwick tend to be more for point to point traffic, so they tend to depend less on connectivity. And so if you look at some of our long haul flights that we may fly around the world to North America and things like that, 50% of our passengers are actually making connections. And in Accra, most of the passengers were point to point. Now, there were some that were connecting, but it was a much higher proportion. And so we said, look, on the balance of where we kind of require the connectivity that Heathrow provides versus Gatwick, which doesn't, we had talked about briefly moving that flight from Heathrow to Gatwick. We heard loud and clear from government, from local officials, and in various discussions we had, that in retrospect we should have had before making that decision, that a flight into Heathrow was very important, that although the amount of connecting passengers we have is lower than we might have on another flight, it's still really important for people in Ghana to have that access primarily to the rest of the UK, to the US, and also to Canada. And so we know that is really important in terms of having that connectivity. What we'd like to do, like I said, with the Gatwick flight, is to see, with those increased seats, is there a different catchment area, one that is more convenient for them to fly? But if it is more convenient for them to fly, they today may have been deciding, let's say, to fly with Emirates or somebody else that does fly out of Gatwick and even accept a connection.
Okay, so in your answer, do I take it that you will never revisit the issue of moving your flight from Heathrow to Gatwick? That's an end.
That's a no. We will not. Yeah.
And I mean, since Sunday, you've had a number of flights both ways. How are the turnouts so far?
How?
I mean,
The turnout so far. Have
the
many
load.
people booked?
Oh, yeah. So I think, unfortunately, I was not on the inaugural flight, but I know the people that were said that the flights were full in both directions. And I think that's really, really good. We've had other inaugural flights where sometimes you find either the flight's not full, you have a bit of directionality, it might be full in one direction or not the other. I think the fact that the flights were full in both directions is just testament to what we thought, which is, that there is demand does exceed supply. And by putting more supply into the market, we would be able to fill those seats. So yeah, it's been very encouraging so far.
Okay, one major issue that is of concern to most passengers flying British Airways is about the delays. What strategies have we put in place to reduce? What causes the delay? Can you pinpoint some of them?
Look, we've had a very, very challenging operating environment over the last year. A lot of that has been a bit of just growing pain as we've grown back post pandemic. I think people often forget at the beginning of 2022, there were still restrictions on travel, and we were only flying 30% of our schedule. And so we're now flying 90% of our schedule, but we've done that over a year and a half. And over time, that's required in bringing lots of pilots, cabin crew, workers at Heathrow Airport, engineers, and things like that. But the kind of the problem in itself is relatively complex. We've definitely been making improvements in our on-time performance, and we have a lot of actions because we know that it's really important to our customers, and it's something that we need to deliver on. But we've had ATC problems. There was a NATS, which is the local ATC provider, had an IT outage for a day. Often have very bad weather in Heathrow. But we've been doing a lot of work is in understanding where those pain points are, and in particular, because my department decides where we fly and we run the schedule, but how do we build a schedule in a way so that it doesn't lead to an on-time performance problem? I'll give you an example. I think we used to do, our aircraft would arrive into Accra and we would do a 90-minute turn. That's what we call our minimum turn time. But the dynamic of the airport, whatever it was, that was not enough time. The flights were often leaving late. When that flight leaves late, people may miss their connections in Heathrow, but that aircraft is then doing something else, right? So this thing kind of propagates. And so we increased our turn time to 2 hours. And another thing that we did was starting on the 8th of January, we have this thing, it's called a minimum connecting time. So how much time do you need between your arrival in Heathrow and the departure of your next flight? And so we increased that to 75 minutes. It used to be 60 minutes, but you got to move very quickly within Terminal 5, or within the terminals to make that happen. And so there's various things that we've done and built into the schedule to introduce more resilience, which will help. And also, as again, we bring more people into the organization. I think the supply chain on engineering is getting better, as there's a lot of work behind the scenes because we know that we need to get our on-time performance up to much higher levels.
Great. One other thing that keeps coming up is the issue of pricing.
Mm-hmm.
With more frequency now, if the patronage keeps going high, is there any possibility of dropping prices?
Yeah, so pricing in the airline industry is very, very, it's highly, highly complex. And there's two things that how airlines price. One is you have prices, but as flights get fuller, right, they're called fare classes, and as fare classes increase, that's what causes the price to increase. And so, right, if you kind of get an entry level fare, it may be lower than if you're booking on the day before departure. And that's just a bit of industry-wide how airline prices works. Two other things that can impact prices in general to speak about is how much it costs to operate in and out of an airport. And so another advantage of Gatwick for us is Gatwick as an airport costs less to fly in and out of than Heathrow does. You would have seen us in the news. Heathrow is a regulated airport and what their charges are, but it is one of the most expensive airports that passengers and airlines pay in order to fly in and out of Heathrow. And then there's another element around what is the cost of operating in and out of Accra and that airport, access to fuel, landing fees, and it is something we talk about with the government. Now, those things end up in a ticket price. But the other thing ultimately is pricing in the airline industry is based on supply and demand. And so if demand exceeds supply, prices tend to go up. And we notice that. We've heard it, we've seen it in complaints, we've seen articles about it. And obviously the way to address that is for us is adding more seats. And that was part of the growth. And so if you think today, we now, with our 3 additional flights, have it's about 35% more seats in the market. Next April, we're going to add a 4th frequency from Gatwick, so it'll be 4 times a week, and seats will be up 55%. And so adding that many seats into the market should, based on economics and supply and demand, lead to lower prices.
Okay, so this year is almost ended. We're in November, and we'll be entering a new year. What is the outlook for the Ghanaian market?
So look, I think for us is first seeing how the additional 3 flights perform, and our decision to add the 4th flight. Obviously, one comes down to, do I have I have a limited number of aircraft, and where can I deploy them, and where's the best place to deploy them. But making that decision early on to add the 4th frequency next April was because as we launched the flight, going back a couple of months when we were doing our plan for summer 24, we were seeing that, there was kind of demand. We were seeing bookings coming in for the flight, and that led us to that 4th daily frequency. I think kind of 2 passed because short of being able to fly the 380 into Ghana, the way for us to increase capacity is through frequency. And so I think what we'd have to evaluate is, one option is taking those 4 weekly frequencies in Gatwick up to a daily. That's a much more efficient way for us to operate in terms of cabin crew and flight crew and things like that. Beyond that, it could be increasing the Heathrow frequency from, let's say, instead of just a daily flight, up to 10 a week. And then the other thing that we're looking at, and again, this comes down to the complexity of airline scheduling and when aircraft are available. But if you look at the flight out of Heathrow and Gatwick, they both depart more or less at the same time, midday, arrive more or less at the same time, depart at the same time. And so while we're now offering consumers airport choice, depending on where they're traveling to in and out of London, we're not offering them different time channels. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, can we offer a different time channel? So you might be able to go overnight in one direction and then overnight in the other direction. Because even in the Heathrow Gatwick, a individual could purchase a ticket where they fly in or out of one airport and go back to the other airport.
How do you rate Ghana's performance in terms of operations in the British Airways portfolio?
Say that, sorry?
The Ghana business in the portfolio of British Airways.
In the portfolio of British Airways. Look, we've done partly because of having this restriction on the number of aircraft we have and flying less long haul. We did a lot of work during the pandemic into what are our core markets. And British Airways has done that work. I'm kind of talking from my experience because I joined British Airways in 2019. If you list out our kind of 4 or 5 core markets, West Africa and Ghana in particular is one of those. And so it is a market that's very important to us. We have a long history of flying there. Our first flight we've been in the market for 86 years. And so it's a market that is important to us, and that one that we want to be present in and do the right thing. And I think if the market wasn't, I think adding seats is just a demonstration of that market being important, because adding seats in that market came at the trade-off of, let's say, adding seats to a different market. But I think it does go beyond the flights, right? We're also involved in local communities. We have a charity, Comic Relief, that we've contributed, I think, $6 million over recent years, and that's been supporting programs to empower girls and women. And we've also we support the One Foundation, and have donated money that's about providing clean water and sanitation into various communities around the country.